All right, here we go. Another episode of Coach's Corner. Joined here today by John Miglarese. We just had a conversation about butchering that. So I hope I got that right. John, I appreciate your time. I guess we'll kick off with you're currently, let me get this right, the Vice President of Player Development and the head coach for USL League One team, Tormenta FC. Is that right?
Something like that.
Something like that. So
that's what they tell me.
So just, I guess, what are your, that's obviously a mouthful, but kind of dissect that. What are your roles on and off the pitch? How do they, relate to each other? Are they distinctly separate? Obviously, or are they, some overlap there?
The key is that there's overlap everywhere, and that's what we're trying to do. So we have three things running simultaneously. We have the USL One franchise, which is the third division of professional soccer. Then we have USL 2, which is fourth division, which is semi-pro. Then we have USL Academy. And so to try to summarize your question in about 35 to 40 seconds, my job is to have continuity from the first team all the way down to the U6s, right? Especially from 12 and up. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that there is a clear identity. There's clear values and clear principles that, Lee, if you went recruiting our U16s one day, you'd recognize some attributes from the first team after watching them maybe on a Saturday night. Tactically, similar ideas. What the coaches are commanding from the sidelines are similar ideas. The demeanor of the coaching staff, the demeanor of the players, who they are, how they represent themselves, and that's transparent and obvious to anybody that would come up and watch a U12, a U17, or the USL 1, USL 2. There's a clear brand, there's a clear identity, and there's a clear set of values. So how that works is I'm clearly the coach of the USL 1 team. That takes up the majority of my time. I lead all the scouting, I lead all the player acquisitions. I do everything that a coach does. And then I oversee the USL 2 program, which my assistant, Ian, he coaches as the head coach. And what we do there is, again, try to bring in top college players, put them in our environment for 3 months, introduce them to our philosophies, our tactics, our values. And then we want that team to clearly represent or be indicative of what the first team represents. And then it just keeps going. And so all that to say, we have built very slowly and steadily a very clear pathway to pro, to where a 13-year-old is being coached by someone on my staff. If they do well enough by 15, 16, maybe they'll be invited to a USL Academy event. If they do extremely well by 17, 18, maybe they'll be invited on the USL 2 team for the summer. If they do exceptionally well in college, then maybe they'll get signed to the USL 1 team in the long term. So we've clearly built continuity, like I said at the beginning, from the youngest of age to the top. And it's hard. It's hard because you want to give your academy coaches freedom to express themselves, yet they can't veer off the path too much. I'm not going to tell them what formation they have to play, but they have to embody some core philosophies that are non-negotiable. So that's essentially what I try to do.
Yeah, it's great. Obviously, I've seen, for the last few years now, that the growth of the club in general, from the outside looking in. I've spent a little bit of time, around the club and speaking to you and competing against, your team, in a friendly and stuff. And it seems like you're very much creating or building an entire club rather than just a team that can compete at the pro level. And I think that's great to see. So talk about some of the buzz surrounding some of those projects. Obviously, the stadiums under construction. I saw something about the IBIS Foundation grants, kind of making it more accessible to more players. And then you've also kind of built out your staff even more so for year 2 than year 1. So a lot of buzz surrounding the club. Talk to some of those things that are going on.
Yeah, no problem. So, the stadium has been a dream for my ownership group for a long time, and that's been a very slow, arduous process. But thankfully, I'm not in charge of that. But it's definitely in the works. I mean, I could right out the window about 300 yards that way. They're moving a lot of dirt. And, you know, our hope is to have that moving very soon. In order to kind of encapsulate everything you just asked, I think what I'm most proud of recently is what the foundation did with the Youth Academy, right? So they've donated a tremendous amount of money that have reduced the fees for a typical 16-year-old kid that play in our academy would have to pay $2,000 a year. Now they've, through this grant, it's reduced it to, I think it was like $800 to $850 for the entire year. And to be involved in an academy, to be involved in hopefully the quality that we're providing for that reduced amount is incredible. Because I think if you were in the Atlanta area or anywhere else, you know, I think that price would go up. And so that's, I wish I could say I had everything to do with that. I didn't, right? That's Brad Nine, that's our ownership group. By building connections in our community and having donors that were willing to do this. And, you know, it makes me really proud because I feel like our club is actually putting their money where their mouth is in terms of how and when and what how they impact the community. So that's big news. That just came out, I think, early last week in terms of what the club is doing there. And then, you know, in terms of our staff, we're not a big club, right? We don't have endless resources for staff hirings. But what we've been able to do by partnering with our academy is, for instance, my assistant, Jorge, he's the Statesboro director for Youth Academy. He just walked to my office a minute ago. He's grabbing some cones, about to head out, right? Ian, he's the head coach of USL 2, but he's also at trainings 2 or 3 times a week for the U19, U17, U15s, and he'll coach most of the USL Academy games. Nick, he's going to take the U19s, and he's the goalkeeping director. So not only does my first team staff help me run the first team and the second team, they're also out at the training ground each evening. So our staff actually has a presence. And it's not just this hybrid academy where like we wear the same brand or something. No, our coaches are actually out there. And I think that's important for the community to see.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the key things if you're going to build an identity and build a club that's consistent from the first team down to the U6s, that, you know, the coaches at the top level for the professional team are out there, you know, not only working with the players, but maybe educating some of the other coaches as well as to how you see things and how you want things done. In building this model, then, is there a particular club or, you know, anybody that you look to and say, you know, that's pretty consistent in terms of what we want to do? How much research went into you know, building this, you know, top to bottom club, or was it just your vision and your staff's vision, the ownership's vision to kind of put it all together?
No, I mean, I've clearly been influenced by multiple directions. I mean, my whole life as a soccer coach, I love what Ajax has done. I think it was the 1994 European Championship team, maybe 95, that 9 of the 11 starters were from a 60-mile radius of Amsterdam. That's phenomenal, right? So they developed one of the world's best clubs or best teams that are capable of winning a European championship within a radius of 60 miles, which is incredible. So it shows it can be done. Now, do I think we can do that? No. Can we dream about that? Sure. But is it a model that we can take some ideas from? 100%. Probably my biggest influence is I took a college team, 13 years ago to Mexico, and we spent two weeks at the Monterrey Tigres Academy. And they had the central field with the first team, then they had the U23s, the U20s, the U19s, 17s, 15s. They were all there. They're all training together. Players are being moved up and down. There was this one organic idea. It wasn't just a bunch of separate coaches having separate methodologies and separate sessions. It was clearly orchestrated to produce a type of player and person that the Monterrey Tigres wants to one day give a shirt to. So that's when I actually saw it at a high level. These were, and Tigres is clearly a top club. At the time, they had Fonseca up top. He was on the cover of FIFA at the time. That left some marks on me for sure, because I could see the bus coming in, dropping the kids off, and they had the first team was like 100 yards away from them. They could see them. There's that tangible, like, that fed that dream for them. And then, of course, you have to build something that works for you. You can't just take what the Tigres and what Ajax has done and like, okay, we're going to do everything they did. Even locally, Atlanta United, okay, we're going to do everything that they did here. That won't work for us. We have a lot of logistical challenges. We're spread out all over. We have Savannah, Hilton Head, Statesboro. We have kids down from Brunswick. We have training centers. And, our games are in Statesboro, but the academy typically trains in Savannah, and that's about an hour to hour and a half, 45 minutes to an hour away. So we can't do it perfectly. So I think it's been a process of figuring out how we can be the best version of ourselves as a club. And it puts a lot of onus on me as the first team manager to put my money where my mouth is. If I'm trying to push a young player or a young coach to be possession oriented and a young player to appreciate repressing and working and running, and then I have a team that sits in a very deep block and counters, it doesn't paint the picture, right? It may help me win that next match to just train defending and defensive and attacking transition, but I also have to incorporate my game plan. Okay, are we lining up our game plan with our identity, with why I say we do what we're going to do? And can a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, and even my own team be inspired by the way we play football? So I think there has to be that organic, that big picture within the small picture of I got to win the next game.
Yeah, obviously, your job at the top level is to win. Is to put a competitive team out on the field, and you're obviously doing a good job of that. I guess take a 17-year-old that's very talented and is maybe ready for that next step to start training with the first team or go through a summer with the USL 2 team. What is that vision? What is that identity of what that player looks like then? What are the key attributes, technically, tactically, physically, mentally, that you guys value in each of those aspects more so than anywhere else?
Yeah, so it's broken down to two things. There's a book by Stephen Covey called The Speed of Trust, and he talks about character and competence. And so we look at those two in a very detailed way. Even for guys that we're tracking for the first team that are playing elsewhere and guys in our own academy. And under that competency, we break it down to very simple aspects of mental speed, physical speed, technical speed. And so when we build out our evaluations for our first team, there's 4 attributes with the 3 speeds plus the character aspect. And then we rate on a scale that we've designed. And then we have a grading system to where one kid could be a 2.7, one could be a 3.2, one player could be a 4.0. It just depends. And so we're using a similar scale from the U12s all the way to the first team. What's a non-negotiable for me is the character aspect. All right, so we have 3 guys on academy contracts. We have Grant, Steven, and Tristan. They have come through our youth academy. We've given them this opportunity to be in a first-team locker room, to be in first-team training, potentially earn first-team minutes if they get an opportunity without losing their collegiate eligibility. They clearly have talent. They have technique. They have mobility. They have good vision. They have a good drive. They're learning to really to be hungry and competitive in every second of every training. But they're also teachable, and they have the trajectory to be a good man one day. Because we can't give an opportunity to a young player if he's not ready for that opportunity. And so much of it is he coachable? Is he teachable? Is he humble? Is he willing to learn? Is he willing to run? Is he willing to work? Does he see this as something he's entitled to or something he's thankful for? Because if you get the wrong young player in a locker room that he's not ready for, it's just going to end up in a negative way. So across the board, they're the 3 speeds and then the character. And under that, there's like 70 million different like micro bullets, right? But those are the key 4 things that we look at: mental speed, technical speed, physical speed, and character. And we rate players based on that.
It's so interesting. I think for me, you know, I'm still, I guess, getting started almost, even though I've been doing this a while now. But I seem to be learning more and more that it's, you know, talent is great and ability is fantastic, and you know, once you've recruited a good player, what's even more important is the person behind that. And you spent a lot more time there talking about character and all those different intangibles, as opposed to can beat a player 1v1, or is an unbelievable finisher, or has a great range of passing.
Yeah.
I guess at what point then, as the head coach, do you decide that a young player is ready, you know, to make that step? You know, is it just a feeling you have? Is it conversations with him? Is it just his consistency, you know, in training? You know, what gives you the green light to say, okay, this kid, we're ready to give him that chance now?
I think you have to put a structure in place, but sometimes you have to go with your gut.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as managers and as coaches and as leaders, you can't. Yeah, I've been reading a lot about the limbic brain, right? And it talks about how this linked to emotion and feeling. And like, you and I are both married, you and I both have kids. If someone were to ask us to describe like how we love our family, you don't have really the words for it, right? Like you can't just break it down. So in a sense, you try to build as much of a structure as you can, you check some boxes, but you got to take a risk. And it's a sink or swim. You got to put the kid in the actual environment, the player in the actual environment. And, you know, the 3 guys that we have in on academy contracts, they know that this is an opportunity, not an entitlement, and they can lose it as much as they've just earned it. And they have to earn it every single day. And if a coaching staff is taking a risk on them, then they owe it to themselves, they owe it to their families, they owe it to the staff to just freaking give it their all. That's all we're asking. And you know what? If he's not fast enough, not technical enough, then okay, we'll see that over time. But the quickest way to get shoved out my door is to be the wrong fit for my locker room. That's just not something I'm going to tolerate. And I think it's got to be both and, not either or. There's a great. Have you been reading much about Julian Nagelsmann, the young manager?
He's you know, he's about my age as well. And
he is. I think he's your age, you young buck.
He's amazing where he is and how he
he's
got
unbelievable.
there. Yeah,
it's unbelievable. So I want to read a quote real quick, if you don't mind. He said, 30% of managing is tactics, 70% is social competence. Every player is motivated by different things. It needs to be addressed accordingly. At this, the top level, at this level, the quality of the players at your disposal will be ensure you play well within a given tactical setup, if the psychological condition is right. So he even says, and he's one of the brightest minds in football right now, that 70% of his job is the psychosocial, right? It's managing the person. That doesn't mean you sign a bunch of nice guys that can't play.
Mm-hmm.
There's that both and quality that's so difficult as coaches to get right, to see that quality and to hold yourself accountable. Like, man, this guy can really play, but he's a prick, right? Or like, man, I want to give this guy a chance, and your heartstrings are just being tugged, but like, he's not quick enough. He's not good enough, right? And you have to make that decision.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess then, how in your recruitment, you know, you like you said, you don't want to turn away a good player who, you know, maybe more difficult to manage, and then you can't give opportunities to just somebody because they're a nice guy. They've got to have, you know, that little bit of both. You know, how did that then impact your recruitment for year one, going into this brand new league? This, you know, for you, first time as a professional level coach, and then how did that change then from year one coming in now into year two? Did your recruitment change in what you were looking for? You know, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a big question, and the answer is yes, because my experience up to that point were collegiate seasons and PDL seasons. So you could build a team for a sprint. But the 9-month pro season is a marathon. And one of my assistants said it best the other day when he said, character stands the test of time. And time is really what shows any kind of weakness. And I just finished reading a book with my captains called Start With Why. And he talks about passion without structure ends up in failure, right? You have to have a good foundation to carry your emotion and your drive, right? If you don't have that foundation, then it falls apart. So I say that to give context of the last year's team was an incredibly talented team that didn't have depth, right? So as soon as we lost a handful of players, we went from 1 or 2 in the league. We from that margin of victory that I could create because I could put a player that's unplayable in a certain half space that team couldn't figure out. We would eventually win the game. But once some of those players were unavailable for selection, now we didn't have any kind of automated ways to score goals. We were relying very heavily on a creative player to solve the problem. And that philosophy works for a college season and a PDL season, because if you can get through 3 months and you can keep your core players healthy, and if you got a good locker room and a good structure, it's almost like letting the horses run in some degree. What I learned the hard way was, we lost our best center back 4 games in. We lost our most experienced striker 6 games in, right? So now 2 guys that I signed that had lots of professional minutes and talented players out for the season. So then we had to change the formation, and okay, that got us another month. That bought us some time. Then we lost another player. Then we lost another player, and then it just was gone. And so the youth and the inexperience from me and my team, I had a bunch of guys that are used to winning in the locker room. And to go from controlling games and pushing games and winning games to defending a lot in games and not being able to play the brand that we wanted to was a tough lesson in humility that I wouldn't replace, to be honest, because I think we were like 8-3-5 and second in the league or something in our first half of the season. And man, we thought pretty highly of ourselves, but it was a bit of fool's gold because it just took the smallest little thing to knock us off our stride. And I think we all learned how to be professionals in the dog days. 9 games without a win, right? Just brutal. But that's when we all learned how to be a professional. And then, funny enough, we got a few guys back from injury, and we finished strong, but just out of the playoffs. So, there's a difference between success and achievement. I think we could have achieved more as a team last year if I had more experience as a manager to know the structure that you need tactically, culturally, to prepare your team for a marathon, not a sprint. So to answer your question in a very long way, yes, I went out, made some acquisitions to the team that were very high in character, that fit the brand of football that we believe in, that also value the same things that we value, and that I think have the character to go the distance. And we went less on flash and more on dependability. Not guys that don't have talent, don't get me wrong. We got some guys that can flat out play. But we went more on consistency than ceiling, right? Because you look at a player like when he touches that ceiling, he's unbelievable. But if he only touches that ceiling every 4th game, right, you're not getting a whole lot of. We went after guys that were maybe not touching that ceiling, but had more of a bell curve in terms of performance. So again, you're building a locker room and a team, and also tactically, I didn't put a whole lot of structure on how we went forward. I've always had the idea of, I'm gonna micromanage you in the defensive third, the middle third, final third. I'm gonna let you express yourselves. We're doing the same, but we're starting to put some It's a pretty tight structure in terms of vertical channels, what you're supposed to occupy, and not letting you go from one side to the other. We don't have a guy that just roams around like a neutral.
Mhm.
Everybody knows their role. Everybody can express themselves within a key space in the field. And I didn't learn that. I had to learn that by losing games, because as soon as we lost to special players, we had no ideas how to score goals. So yeah, it was a big dose of humility all at once.
Yeah, it's that's fascinating to me. I mean, I know quite a few. I've competed against, coached against some of the guys that you picked up, straight out of college. And like you said, it's a 3 month college season. That's just, it's counterintuitive. How can a 3 month college sprint prepare you for a 9 month marathon professional season? Do you think then college soccer is still a good outlet for guys,
Yeah.
that have that aspirations of becoming a pro? Or can it, or what can college guys do to prepare themselves better, I guess, for that marathon? Because we can't, as coaches, I can't shorten or lengthen the time of the season or the amount of time I can get with them on the field. How can they manage that themselves?
It's a real challenge, but I think if you have the right person, they can find a way. I mean, just because he's an alum, let's talk about Jordan Skelton. He's a perfect example of, okay, he had a limited college season. He played a lot of games, top player in the fall. He took care of his body in the winter, put everything he had in the spring season with you, found a top PDL that really pushed him, tried to find, he played for Mark McKeever for 2 years, who really pushed him. He found a way. And I think if a young player has aspirations to make it professionally, there is a path, there is a way. It's not easy and it may not be direct. However, when you look at my roster, I've got Young Harris, Lander, Palm Beach Atlantic. I've got a lot of Division twos here. And a lot of these guys the radar just missed them. They just didn't pop up enough like some of these, like the mainstream Division ones typically get a lot of the radar. Doesn't mean they're any less players. And the funny thing is the professional coaches actually know that. So, what I would say is it's the individual in the program has to lead themselves. If this is what they want, then if they say they want to be a pro, then their actions need to line up with being a pro. And you don't just walk into a locker room and decide, I'm a pro now. You're a pro 3 years before you're a pro. How you eat, how you sleep, how you handle yourself on social media, how you talk, how you learn, the books you read, the habits you pick up, the company you keep. Like if you want to be a pro, it's not just once you sign the contract. It starts way in advance. And I think Jordan is an excellent example of someone who was already trying to think like a pro before he even signed the contract. Already was treating his body like a pro before he stepped into a pro locker room.
Yeah, it's amazing the consistency in that message, and the one that I gave to a high school team last week. A high school coach in North Carolina that I know had asked me to present to his team, what we're looking for as college coaches in high school athletes. And one of the things I said was you can't wait until you're in college to start living the lifestyle of a college athlete. There are sacrifices you've got to make. You've got to be dedicated to your nutrition, your hydration, your sleep patterns, the weight room, the way that you train and take care of your body. Even then, at a high school age, preparing yourself for college, and it seems to be, the similar kind of message. You've got to be leading that pro lifestyle 24/7, 365 during your time in college to prepare you for that marathon that you're talking about.
Another great example is Pablo Hara, who had a great career at Wingate. And when he walked into I remember the first time I met him, he came into our team meal. I think he had to graduate. I can't remember what it was. He had a class, so he showed up like a day late. And he walked into our team meal, shook everybody's hand, looked everybody in the eye, was very professional, went out to first training, how he warmed up, and everybody was like, okay.
This guy's serious.
This guy takes care of himself, right? He wasn't a professional, but he already was was acting like one before he signed the contract. And I think that's important. And as coaches, and especially college coaches in USL2 and in PSL, when you're dealing with guys that are dreaming about playing pro one day, that's the accountability right there. Like, okay, you say you want to be here one day, are your actions lining up with what you say your goals are? And more often than not, you'll see talented players that think they're going to just get there just because they're talented. Everybody's flipping talented at this level. Everybody is. And when you get a trial, you could be a baller, but man, if you don't have the intangibles, you're not going to make it. You're just not going to make it.
So what are the, you said there that everybody at the level that you're at now is talented. What then in your coaching, has changed from being a college coach to now coaching professionals? Obviously, on a college roster, you've got 50% fighting for starting 11 spot. You've got another group of guys, and then depending on how big your roster is, you try and avoid any session killers, to put it politely. But you've got different levels, let's put it that way, of talent. In a professional environment where everybody's at a certain level, you're still going to have that, top player and last player off the bench. But I guess the gap is maybe a little bit less. How has your coaching changed or evolved getting to the professional level?
I think in roster DNA, one thing that I would say is with this year's team, I want competition everywhere. I didn't want a guy on a contract that I never saw really ever play. We signed less players this year, and then we backfill with more academy players. Because for me, like if we get destroyed with injuries, I'd rather give an academy kid an opportunity than put in a body that I don't really believe in, right? So I think we have what I learned the hard way last year is if you don't have that contention for shirts day in and day out, if you have one bad training, one bad week, one bad game, you could be out. You have to have that sense of competition for spots. And it makes your job exponentially easier when that happens, because it's just, you have a balanced team and you have a bad day, you can be replaced. And I think we have a much more balanced team this year, and I really push for that, because last year we didn't have that. Secondly, the amount of details and the level of coaches that you go up against. I think I've loved having that chess match in game. That's different than any other level that I've coached, right? How Orlando would try to expose us last year. They would try to overload one side, isolate the other on the weakness they saw on a flank, and try to get around us. There are clear game plans that it took you about 12 minutes to figure out what they're doing. 70% of the teams set middle third pressing traps for us last year because we wanted to play, try to bait us into a key area, press, counter quickly. So it was evading those traps and trying to building game plans that don't send traffic into the area that they want to pinch you in. I mean, there's so many more details that you have to get right at this level that, a couple mistakes can cost you a match, because if you make a blunder, you get punished at this level. And I think at the collegiate level, only against the really good teams, like when I was in your conference, I knew if I made a mistake against Lander, punished. Young Harris, punished. Like, it's every game that way. And even more so, that you have to draw pretty tight game plans without overcoaching. Mm-hmm. Because I think the delicate balance is giving the guys freedom to express themselves with enough structure to keep us organized, but then you don't take away creativity by, overcoaching the match and making them drones. That's the real delicate balance of managing at this level that I have to get better at every single day. It's a unique challenge, but it's a good one at that.
Yeah, it's there are certain games you've coached in our conference. You see it in our region. There are certain games where you never take any win or go into a game thinking it's done and dusted. But if you turn up and you play pretty well, you're going to get a positive result. And and then there are other games, you know, Landon Young Harris, you know, and teams at that level that, like you said, it comes down to one set piece or one pattern of play or one misstep or one misjudgment, and then that's the difference. I guess, does it make your life easier in a sense then when you come to coaching these players to drive that intensity? And is the competition and that level of intensity already there because it's ingrained in, you know, the kind of guys that you are recruiting? Do you have to coach less in that aspect, but more in terms of those little details?
I think, like we said earlier, you have to have a filter in your locker room. So I want uber competitive people. I want to surround myself with people that really love the process of getting better. Like they live and breathe it, and that's where they get their joy, and really get pissed off when they lose. And so if you've done a fairly job of building that, then it naturally happens. You have that cross-pollination, you have that energy, you have that buzz in the locker room, you have that buzz at training. The hardest part is harnessing that but not killing it, right? It's guiding that drive, that desire to win, their dreams to make it as a professional, and putting it in the right way without squelching it. And so I think, you know, we tended to, well, I tended to last year, give a lot of information and scouting reports. By the end of the year, much less. You know, presentations were short. We would put the onus on them. We'd send a message out with a presentation that they had to look on the night before. And then I would ask questions, and we try to narrow down the amount of lecture time for me so that the player can take more ownership. You know, I think at the college level, you have to present so much of your information. What I learned the hard way last year, and I think I'm going to do a much better job of this year, is I've got to delegate. I can't do everything. So at the collegiate level, how you travel, how you dress, the uniforms show up on time, paying the referees, like everything is your responsibility. So when you move to this level, you're naturally like, okay, is the bus on time? What did you eat at lunch? Was the broccoli cold? Were the cones? Like, you're taking responsibility for everything. And that's where I made my biggest mistake last year, is I had to learn, like, okay, time out. I got to put some clear boundaries about what I'm taking responsibility for, and where I'm channeling my energy. And if I'm putting it everywhere outside of what the team actually needs me to channel it to, then they're not getting the best version of me. Doesn't mean I don't care if the broccoli's cold at lunch. Instead of me going to ask, you know, hey, can you fix that? I'm just like, hey, that sucks. Well, get to work. It's a different approach of, they know exactly where my energy is going to be spent. And I think last year, to allude to one of your previous questions, I hadn't built out my staff enough to where I could delegate enough, right? And going back to that 70-30 thing, you know, when there's that whole battlefield mindset of, like, if you're right up on the front lines, you can't see the big picture. But if you're able to remove yourself, delegate some things, step back, and then see how everything kind of folds in together, then you can make educated decisions. And so this year, I'm trying to do a better job of that, because it's different.
Yeah, it's one area that I'm consciously trying to get better at, because a couple of reasons. One, the first 3 years or so at Leeds McRae, I was 23, 24, 25 years old. I didn't know enough about what I was doing to be able to pass on any responsibility to anybody else. And I think there's still an aspect to that now, but I also didn't have really anybody to pass it on to. You know, I didn't have a full-time assistant coach until year 4. You know, and then during my time at Landa, we've had such good coaches come in, I think, as our assistant coaches for the program, that they naturally have moved on pretty quickly. You know, Rob Seaton's down at College of Charleston now, and Matty Evans moved on quickly to App State, and I've brought Dale Parker in, a former teammate of mine, and now this is really almost the first time in a few years where we're going into year 2 with the same
Yeah.
Which is nice. So, you know, we're now getting to a level where we can really start to delegate and pass responsibility. And whilst coming together. Just to maybe change course a little bit. We're obviously going through a difficult period in not having access to being on the pitch and coaching. You guys are back up and running now, right?
Ish. So we're doing groups of 4, and that's it. One coach, group of 4. They're coming in when you have to stay far apart. It's something, no contact. It's mostly fitness, strength, technical oriented, but it's the best we can do.
I guess then to backtrack to when this all started, was in middle of March. You guys had not even played a game yet. I mean, you're still in the preseason phase, right? So I know for us on our end, like, we've got players from all over the world. Most of them left and went back home. What happened to your guys? Did they? Because I know you housed quite a few of them in apartments, right? Did they? Because they lived there, they were still in town. How did you manage that process? Communication like?
That's been a challenge. So there are a couple of things that have mandated how we've responded to this. So clearly, a lot of these guys the internationals are on work visas. So that makes it a little bit more complicated. So what the league said is that any player under a contract has to stay in the market. They can't leave. So they couldn't go visit a relative in Atlanta, or certainly can't go visit a relative in Germany or anything like that. They had to stay, in market. So we couldn't allow them to leave. So we stayed. And so thankfully we have our own training ground. They did a moratorium on any kind of training, any kind of instruction. So our front office would open the closet, put the gear out. The guys would come out and just do their own individual workouts of their own. One of my assistants who coordinates all the strength and fitness with the sports science department at Georgia Southern, who works with us, they built out a workout plan that closely replicates, what playing in a match would look like. They were doing that on their own. I was trying to call every player once a week. My assistants were trying to have small group Zoom calls about tactics. We were having quiz nights on Friday. We had a guest speaker just through a lucky connection, a big-time player that starts in the Premier League. Can't tell you who it is. We got him on a Zoom. It was unbelievable just to pick this guy's brain as a team. And I've had several players say that was one of the best things that's happened to me because this guy was transparent about his story. He's played in World Cups. He's on the big lights. And, it's been good as a coach for me my conversations are more like, all right, how's your family? Are they okay? Instead of let's talk football. It's more relational, than anything else. Do you need anything? Can I bring you anything? Are you out of toilet paper? Stuff like that. Now it's like, hey, are you all right? Instead of, can you get better? So in the last 4 weeks, they've switched to small group training. So now they come in and I can put eyes on them every day, Monday through Friday. We can take them through the paces with limited instruction, no contact. But I think you and I were chatting before this. You don't always choose what you have to lead your team through. And as leaders and as coaches, the relational component for me is the most important. And yes, I want to win matches. I want to play good football, but with what's happening in the world today, right now, you have to be a leader and you have to be available and try to lead them through what they're going through. I don't think it's been anything that coaching school has prepared us for, to be honest.
Yeah, you mentioned something, like you said, we were chatting briefly before we started this, and you kind of hit the nail on the head there about as a coach, we have our session planned, we have our week, our micro, our macro cycle, we periodize an entire season and an entire calendar year, and then all of a sudden, something pops up that prevents you from doing that. And I guess as leaders, we have to, in this case, react because we can't, prepare for it. So, it's. I think that relational aspect for me has been highlighted even more because of this. It's something that the last couple of years I've known was of more and more importance in managing the people, as even twice as much as managing the player. And you're kind of forced now to kind of take a step back because you're not on the field and think, all right, how else can I impact, these guys' lives? And it's interesting to hear, a couple of things that you've done with your team that, keeps the guys engaged and motivated. And because it's a tough time for everybody. So,
Yeah.
how then, with have the league given you any sort of guidance for what's next? Like, what's the next step in terms of return to play? And
Ooh, that's classified information, Lee. I tell you, I'm gonna have to kill you.
I mean, is there a plan to get back to having a season? I mean, obviously the EPL starts in a couple of weeks. Bundesliga is back up and running.
Oh, they saved us all, didn't they? Man.
Trust
At
the
first
Germans
it was
to lead
weird,
the
but
way.
I put it on mute and it's fine. So I would say unofficially, I'm confident that we will have a season. I think it'll be a condensed format.
Mm-hmm.
My hope is we'll have some semblance of normal training return within the next couple of weeks. And my hope is we'll be playing in July. That's been kind of a goal that we've been aiming at as a league for months. And I think we're starting to trend towards that. The challenge for us, it'll be very different than any other thing that we've ever done. I mean, social distancing in locker rooms, social distancing on trips. I mean, as a coach, like that's when you get the guys together to click. Like messing about on the bus, you having team meetings with team bonding things happening, pool sessions after a match, meals out together. All that's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
All it's going to be different. We're going to have to do everything from a socially distant scenario. I think there's going to be lots of testing mandated, but I don't know anything official yet. These are just things that I'm hearing. So my hope is we'll have something to where we can at least return to normal training in the next couple of weeks with games, hopefully starting in July. But that is an unofficial answer because I really don't know the honest truth of what's going to happen. That's what we're gearing towards, and we're hoping that will happen.
I mean, I guess nobody really knows. It's such a fluid and flexible situation, and we all just we have to adapt as we go along. Do your goals for year 2 then change, or have you had to alter them at all in terms of what obviously a condensed season, but in terms of what you want to get out of the season?
No, and this is going to be kind of a cheesy answer, but we don't really talk about our outcome goals all that much. I mean, we're so process oriented in terms of what we demand from our players that the process hasn't changed. Like they still have an obligation to make themselves better every day, and we have an obligation as a staff is to make them better men and better players, and that's not going to stop. I think we're going to have some greater challenges ahead. I think we're going to have a schedule that's compressed, less time for recovery. I think we'll be missing some of those team bonding opportunities, like I said. But I think it's just something that like we just said, as leaders, like we're going to have to lead these guys through it the best way we can and think outside the box and put the person first, because this is weird. Like I'm supposed to not shake hands. I mean, that's part of football, is shaking the hand of your opponent after a match. We, celebrating a match. I mean, a goal or a win. Like you're supposed to just clap from a distance. But it's something we're all going to have to get used to. I mean, I'm looking out my window and we've got some training going on, and our players have masks on as they're coaching young kids, and so much of coaching young kids is looking them in the eye and engaging with them with your face. And now it's going to take that human element out, and I think we're going to have to really strive to find ways to re-inject that back in.
Maybe it'll all make us better coaches, better people, and better communicators. And
exactly.
One day we'll, in a strange way, obviously we regret all the hard times and the death and everything. But I don't know. I hate to say we'll be thankful for it, but maybe some of the opportunities that it represents, for us to take stock of the way that we lead, the way that we coach, and communicate. Maybe it's making us all a little bit better. But last question then before I let you go. You've been very generous with your time. What are you reading right now? Give me a book or a podcast or someone I can continue to educate myself with.
Right now, I'm powering through the Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink. We just finished Start With Why with the leadership group and the team. There's some good ones out there. Happy to share my list, but those are the two I've been pushing through. Legacy is a great one, of course, that I use a lot as a resource. I mean, there's a bunch, but that's the one I'm reading right now, is the dichotomy of leadership. It's like full-on testosterone leadership.
I've seen a couple of his YouTube videos. It's
it's intense.
Pretty powerful stuff. But John, I appreciate your time. Fascinating insight. Always a pleasure to speak with you and learn from you. And thank you very much.
All right, Lee, take care of yourself, brother.